The last payphone rang at 3:17 in the morning. I remember the time because the meter in my cab froze when it happened. Not stopped, froze. The little green numbers stayed lit on the dashboard, the seconds locked in place. The fare stuck at $18.40, even though I was still rolling down 11th Avenue with my hands shaking so hard I could barely keep the wheel straight. That was last night or this morning, I'm not sure anymore. Let me go back. The phone was outside an old check-cashing place that had been closed for years. The glass booth was cracked. There were weeds growing up through the concrete around the base. The receiver cord had been cut. I could see the frayed end hanging from the box. I picked it up anyway. I don't know why. I just needed to know. And still it rang. A real ring. Metallic. Sharp. Old-fashioned. The kind of sound you don't realize you remember until it finds you alone at night. I pulled over because I already knew who was calling. I knew before I got out. I knew before I crossed the empty sidewalk. I knew before I lifted the receiver and heard my own voice on the other end, thin and breathless, whispering from somewhere very far below the city. Martin, it said. My name, my voice. Don't go home. I have driven nights for 26 years. Mostly Manhattan, sometimes Queens, sometimes Brooklyn if the fare was worth it. I know the city after midnight better than I know my own apartment. I know which delis keep the coffee fresh. I know which blocks smell like garbage even in winter. I know where people cry in the back seat and think the driver can't hear them. And I know dead things when I see them. Not bodies, I mean dead places. Closed subway entrances with old tiles behind the gates. Empty diners with paper over the windows. Phone booths nobody bothered removing because the city forgot they existed. That's where it started. A payphone outside a shuttered pharmacy on 9th. It was 12:46 a.m., maybe 3 weeks ago. Light rain. No fare in the cab. I was circling because I didn't want to go home yet. Home was a basement apartment in Astoria with one lamp, a bad radiator, and a dent in the wall where my ex-wife threw a coffee mug in 2019, so I drove. And that was what I did when I couldn't sleep. The phone started ringing as I passed. I almost kept going. Nobody answers a payphone anymore, especially not a dead one. The whole booth had been tagged over. The keypad was missing half the buttons. The screen where a number used to be was black. But something about the sound made me break. It wasn't loud. That was the part I remember. It didn't echo down the block like in a movie. It just sat there in the wet air, neat and patient, like it had all night. I got out with my collar up and told myself some drunk kid had rigged it somehow. A prank, a TikTok thing, something stupid. The receiver was cold when I picked it up. Not rain cold. Freezer cold. I put it to my ear. For a second there was only static. Then a man said, "Please don't hang up." I didn't answer. I looked around the street like there might be someone watching from a doorway, but the block was empty. The man breathed fast through the line. "I don't know where I am," he said. "I think I'm under the station." What station? I don't know. They don't announce them anymore. His voice wasn't theatrical. That's important. He didn't sound possessed or crazy. He sounded exhausted, hoarse, like he had been yelling for a long time and had finally learned it didn't help. There are trains, he said. They keep coming, but they don't stop. I hung up. I'm not proud of that. I hung up and got back in the cab and drove 6 blocks before I realized I was holding my breath. The next morning I looked up the number printed above the phone, but there wasn't one. Just 4 torn stickers and a smear of glue. By noon, I had convinced myself it was nothing. By dinner, I had almost forgotten the man's voice. Then at 1:09 a.m., the same phone rang while I was taking a fare to Penn Station. My passenger heard it too. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. He was a young guy in a suit, drunk but not messy, scrolling through his phone. When the payphone started ringing, he looked up and laughed. People still use those? I didn't answer. The ring followed us for half a block. I watched it in the rear view mirror until the booth disappeared behind the rain. That night, 3 more rang. 1 outside a pawn shop. 1 near the old entrance to the Worth Street station. 1 under the shadow of the FDR, where the river wind smells like rust. I didn't answer any of them. But after the 3rd one, my radio cut out. Not the dispatch radio. I don't use one anymore. The regular radio. It had been playing some AM talk show, one of those late night programs where callers argue about parking laws and ghosts and politicians. The signal broke into a low grinding sound. Train brakes. That squeal metal makes when something heavy is trying to stop and failing. Then a woman's voice came through. Soft, close. You heard us. I slapped the radio off so hard I cracked the plastic around the knob. For 2 days, I stayed away from payphones. That is harder than you think if you start looking for them. They're everywhere. Not the shiny ones tourists take pictures of. The old ones. The forgotten ones. On corners where the streetlights buzz. Outside bodegas that haven't changed their awning since the 90s. Bolted to subway walls behind construction fencing. The city has layers of things it never properly buried. That was when I started seeing his face again. Not in the cab. Not standing on sidewalks. Nothing that dramatic. Just pieces. A black jacket in the rain. A hand on wet pavement. 1 white sneaker turned sideways near the curb. I had not thought about that night in almost a month. That's a lie. I thought about it every day. I just didn't say it out loud. It happened on Delancey, a little after 4 a.m. I was finishing a 12-hour shift. The rain had turned the road silver. My eyes were burning. I'd been awake too long, and the coffee had stopped working. He came out between 2 parked vans. I saw him too late. That's what I told myself. I saw him too late. There was the thud against the hood, then the shape of him rolling off toward the curb. My brakes locked. Someone honked behind me. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I got out. He was on his side, with his arm under him wrong. Young, maybe 25, maybe 30. His eyes were open. He was trying to breathe. I remember the sound because it wasn't a scream. It was this wet little pull of air, like his body had forgotten how to do it properly. I took 2 steps toward him. Then headlights turned the corner. A truck, I think. Or another cab. I don't know. I panicked. There's no better word. I got back in and drove away. I told myself someone else would stop. I told myself he was already gone. I told myself 100 things, and none of them made the sound of his breathing disappear. A week later, I checked the news. Nothing, no article, no report. No mention of a man hit on Delancey at 4 a.m. For a while, that made it worse. Then it made it easier. No body meant no case. No case meant maybe he lived. Maybe he got up. Maybe I clipped him, scared him, bruised him, and my mind had turned it into something worse because I was tired and guilty. People can talk themselves into anything if the alternative is prison. The first call I answered after that came from a payphone on West 43rd. I had just dropped off 2 tourists at a hotel. They were laughing when they got out, pulling their suitcases through puddles, completely unaware that my hands had gone numb around the wheel. The phone rang across the street. I sat there for 11 rings. I counted. On the 12th, I got out. There was no cord attached to the receiver. It was hanging from nothing. Still, when I lifted it, there was a woman crying on the line. Not sobbing. Crying quietly the way people cry in hospital waiting rooms. "I can't find the stairs," she said. I closed my eyes. "Where are you?" "I don't know." "What do you see?" "Tiles, green tiles, old ones. There's water on the floor." She swallowed. "There are people here, but they won't talk to me." "Who are they?" "I think they're waiting." "For what?" She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "For the trains to open." Something moved behind me. I turned fast. The street was empty. When I put the receiver back to my ear, the woman said, "You shouldn't be able to hear us." I hung up. This time I called 911. I said there was someone trapped underground near 43rd. I said I heard a woman calling for help through an old phone. The dispatcher asked for my location twice, then asked if I needed medical assistance. I said no. She sent a patrol car anyway. 2 cops showed up. 20 minutes later, they looked at the phone. One of them lifted the receiver, shook his head, and said, "This thing's been dead for years." I asked if they could check the subway entrances. The older cop stared at me for a long second. "You been drinking tonight?" I laughed because the other option was screaming. After that, the calls got worse. Not louder. Closer. The next voice knew the name of the diner where I stopped for coffee. "Do you still go to Marcy's?" a man asked from a phone outside the old Port Authority entrance. I didn't speak. "You sit in the back booth," he said. "You put 3 sugars in it even though the doctor told you not to." Who is this? I don't know anymore. His honesty scared me more than any threat could have. There was static, and under it, that same endless metal sound. Wheels on tracks. "Everyone forgets," he said. "Not all at once. First your birthday, then your mother's face, then the sound of your own name." What is this? "You tell me, Martin." I dropped the receiver. It swung there, knocking softly against the side of the booth. Tap, 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 like knuckles on glass. The next morning, I went to the public library because I didn't want this search in my apartment. I looked up old transit maps, abandoned stations, accidents, maintenance tunnels. There are more sealed places under the city than people know. Old platforms, closed passageways, utility rooms, forgotten staircases behind tile walls, places where the maps just stop. That should have comforted me. It didn't, because none of what I found explained why a disconnected phone on 43rd had a list of recently dead people scratched into the metal plate beneath the coin slot. I noticed it on the 4th night. Names, tiny, uneven, dug in with something sharp. Melissa V., Arnold K. June P., Tommy S. Some had dates beside them, all recent. I took pictures. The next day the names were gone. Not painted over, not scratched out. Gone. Like the metal had never been marked. That was when I started sleeping in the cab. Not well. 10 minutes here. 20 there. Waking up with my mouth dry and the taste of pennies under my tongue. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard a train approaching in the dark. Not subway loud, deeper, older, like something moving beneath the tunnels we built. On the 7th night, a payphone rang inside my cab. There was no phone in my cab. I was parked near the hospital waiting for a fare when the sound started behind me. I froze. Ring, ring, ring. I looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. Ring, ring, ring. It was coming from under the passenger seat. I reached down and found an old black receiver where the floor mat should have been. No base, no cord, just the receiver, lying there like someone had carefully placed it for me. I don't remember picking it up. 1 second I was staring at it, the next it was against my ear. A young man said, "It's raining where I am." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might pass out. He sounded calm. That was the worst part. too calm, like he had already spent all the fear he had. "What's your name?" I asked. There was a pause. I had one. The windows fogged from the inside. I wiped the windshield with my sleeve. Outside, people moved in and out of the hospital doors under bright fluorescent light. Alive people, real people, nurses smoking, a man carrying flowers, a woman arguing into her cell phone. Nobody looked at me. "I was on the street," he said. "I remember that." I stopped breathing. I think somebody hit me. I lowered the receiver, but his voice kept coming from it. I couldn't move my legs. The hospital doors slid open and shut. Open and shut. "I heard an engine," he said. "It stayed for a second." My throat closed. Then it left. I threw the receiver into the back seat. It landed on the cushion. The line stayed open. Soft static filled the cab. Then he said from behind me now, "Why did it leave?" I got out and ran into the hospital. I don't know what I expected. Confession, arrest, a priest, a doctor, anything with walls and lights and witnesses. I stood in the emergency room entrance, shaking so badly that a security guard asked if I needed help. I said no. Then I saw the payphone by the vending machines. It was mounted on the wall between a broken coffee dispenser and a bulletin board full of flu shot flyers. It rang once. Every person in that waiting room turned toward it at the same time. Then they all turned back, like nothing had happened. I walked out. When I came back out, the cab was idling where I left it, but the meter was running and I hadn't left it running. The fare read $18.40. I reset it and didn't think about it again. After that, the city stopped pretending. The phones rang before I reached them. Sometimes 3 or 4 blocks away, all at once. The passengers in my cab never heard them anymore. Or if they did, they wouldn't admit it. One woman asked me to turn off whatever that awful train sound was. But when I asked what she meant, she started crying and begged me to let her out at the next corner. A man in a business suit got in near Bryant Park, gave me an address in Queens, then spent the whole ride staring at my rear view mirror. When we hit the bridge, he whispered, "There's someone sitting beside me." There wasn't. I looked. No one. But the seatbelt on the empty side was pulled tight across the cushion, like it was holding a body in place. The calls came for me anyway. At 2:18, a payphone outside a closed laundromat rang, and when I answered, a child asked if her mother was still waiting on the platform. At 2:41, a man told me the trains had windows, but the people inside them were pressed against the glass from the wrong side. At 3:03, an old woman asked me to tell her son she was sorry, then forgot what a son was while I listened. And then at 3:29, someone breathed my name. Not the young man from Delancey, someone else a voice I had not heard in 8 years. My father, he died in a nursing home in Queens with one lung working and no idea who I was. "Martin," he said. I leaned against the booth and almost slid to the sidewalk. "No. There's no sunlight here. No. I hear trains, but your mother won't get on." My mother had died before him. He started crying. My father never cried. Not when he lost the house. Not when my sister stopped speaking to him. Not when the cancer came back. But on that dead payphone in the rain, under a street light full of dead bugs, he cried like a child. "They keep telling us the next one is ours," he said. "But when the doors open, everyone inside is already looking at us." I pressed my hand over my mouth. Then his voice changed. Not into something demonic, something worse. He became suddenly alert. "Don't let them know you can hear the announcements." "What announcements?" He whispered. "They're not calling stations." Static. Then far beneath the static, a public address system crackled. The voice was too distorted to make out at first. Then I heard it. Clear as if the speaker were above my head. "Martin Bell. Service change. Martin Bell. Stand clear of the closing doors." I dropped the phone and ran. I kept running until my knees hurt. A man my age should not run like that. Not with my back. Not after 26 years of sitting 12 hours a night. But I ran because every payphone I passed began ringing as I came near. One after another. Ringing ahead of me, ringing behind me, ringing across the avenue. A whole city of dead little bells, waking up in the dark. By dawn, I was sitting on the curb outside Marcy's diner, soaked through, watching delivery trucks move through morning traffic like the world had not ended. Marcy herself brought me coffee. She didn't ask what happened. People who work nights know when not to ask. She just set the cup beside me and said, "You look like you heard from somebody." I looked at her. She looked back. For a second I thought she knew. Then she said, "Bad joke. Sorry." I almost told her everything. Instead, I asked if she remembered a man getting hit on Delancey a few weeks back. Her face changed. Just a little. "What man?" "I don't know. Young, black jacket, white sneakers." She stared at me too long. Then she said, "You should go home, Marty. Nobody calls me Marty except people who knew me before I became the kind of man who drives away." That afternoon I went back to Delancey. In daylight, the intersection looked ordinary. Ugly but ordinary. Delivery bikes, honking cars, steam rising from a manhole. A woman pushing a stroller with one hand and texting with the other. I parked half a block away and walked to the spot. There was no blood. Of course there wasn't. rain and traffic and time take care of evidence. But someone had taped a flyer to a lamppost, not a missing person flyer, a memorial. The paper was curled from weather, the ink running. A photo of a young man smiling awkwardly in a graduation gown. His name was Caleb Ruiz, 27 years old, beloved son, brother, friend. There was no date of death. Just 2 words written across the bottom in black marker. Still waiting. I stood there until someone bumped my shoulder and told me to move. I thought about knocking on doors, asking who put it there, whether anyone saw what happened. But I had spent 3 weeks not asking, and I was good at it by now. That night I parked my cab 2 blocks from the river and turned off my phone. My real phone. I thought about walking into a precinct. I thought about telling them everything. The hit and run, the calls, Caleb, my father, the trains. I even practiced the sentence. My name is Martin Bell, and I killed someone. But every time I tried to picture saying it, I saw the cop's face changing from concern to pity to boredom, because the rest would make me sound insane. And maybe I was. That was the thought I kept touching like a sore tooth. Maybe none of this was real. Maybe guilt had eaten through something in my head. Maybe there were no calls, no underground place, no trains. Just a tired old cab driver who hit a man and couldn't live with himself. Then the phone in my pocket rang. I had turned it off. The screen stayed black, but it rang. Not my ringtone. That old metallic payphone ring. I held it in both hands until it stopped. A voicemail appeared. No number, no timestamp. Just one message. I played it. There was breathing first. Then Caleb. I remember your cab now. I stared at the river through the windshield. Black water. Broken reflections. I remember the light on top. My phone crackled. I remember you getting out. I squeezed it until my fingers hurt. I remember being happy. I made a sound I didn't recognize. He continued almost gently. Because I thought you were coming to help me. I opened the cab door and vomited into the gutter. When I lifted my head, the city had gone quiet. Not normal quiet, not late night quiet. Empty quiet, no cars, no sirens, no distant music, no helicopters, no people, just wind-moving trash along the curb. Then under that, a train horn. Low, long, impossible. There are no train tracks there. The streetlights flickered once. Every parked car on the block had someone sitting in the back seat. Not moving. Not breathing that I could see. Just silhouettes behind fogged glass. Then my meter turned on by itself. The destination field, which had been broken for years, lit up in green letters. Delancey/below. I don't remember driving there. I remember pieces. Red lights that never changed. An ambulance parked sideways across an empty intersection with no driver. A subway entrance I had never seen before. Its stairwell descending from the sidewalk between two buildings that had no gap. At the bottom of the stairs, a payphone rang. I should have kept driving, I know that. I hear people say that in stories all the time. Why did you go closer? Why did you answer? Why didn't you leave? Because when the dead call you by name long enough, the living world starts feeling like the lie. I parked. The subway entrance had no sign. Just stairs going down into yellow light. I could hear the phone ringing from below, and beneath it trains. Not one, many. Passing in both directions, deeper than the station should have been. The air coming up the stairs smelled like wet concrete and hot metal. I took the first step, then another. By the fifth step, I could no longer hear the city above me. By the 10th, the walls changed. Not all at once. The modern tile gave way to older tile, then cracked tile, then green tile, stained brown at the edges. Water ran down the walls in thin black threads. There were advertisements along the stairwell, but the faces had been scratched out. Not vandalized, removed. Like someone had carefully scraped away every pair of eyes. The payphone was at the bottom. It stood on the platform beside a rusted column, glowing under a fluorescent light that buzzed and clicked. The platform stretched farther than it should have. I could not see the end. Across the tracks was another platform. People stood there. Hundreds of them. Shoulder to shoulder, silent. All facing me. I knew some of them, not personally, but from the calls. A woman in a hospital gown, a child holding one shoe, an old man in a Mets cap, a young woman with wet hair plastered to her cheeks, and Caleb, black jacket, white sneakers. His body was intact, but wrong in small ways. One shoulder lower than the other, one hand curled too tightly, his chest barely moving. He looked at me without anger. That nearly broke me. The payphone rang. Even though I was standing right beside it, I picked up. My own voice spoke immediately. "Martin!" I looked across the tracks. None of the dead moved. "Don't go home," my voice said. I whispered, "Where are you?" A pause. Then my voice said, "Still in the cab." The platform lights flickered. Across the tracks, Caleb lifted his hand slowly and pointed behind me. I turned. My cab was parked at the far end of the platform. Not on the street, not above ground. There, underground, angled against a column, like it had crashed there years ago. The headlights were on, the driver's door was open, and in the front seat, slumped over the wheel, was me. Older, thinner, mouth open, eyes filmed white. The meter was running. The fare read $18.40. I tried to step back, but something brushed my ankle. A strip of yellow caution tape lay across the platform edge. Only it wasn't caution tape. It was a line of names. Thousands of them, printed in black. Some I knew, most I didn't. Mine was already there. Martin Bell. The announcement system crackled above me. Uptown service delayed. The dead across the tracks lowered their heads. Downtown service delayed. Caleb closed his eyes. Passenger assistance requested. The tracks began to vibrate. Wind pushed through the tunnel from nowhere. The payphone receiver was still pressed to my ear. My own voice whispered, "When the doors open, don't look inside." Light appeared in the tunnel. Not headlight white. Something dimmer. Older. The people across from me began to cry quietly. That was the worst sound I've ever heard. Not screams. Not pleading. Quiet crying from hundreds of throats at once. People too tired to beg anymore. The train came into the station without slowing. Car after car blurred past, windows dark, metal sides streaked with grime. Then it slowed. Not with brakes, with intention. The doors lined up in front of me. They opened. I looked. I looked. Inside the train were phone booths, rows and rows of them. Bolted where seats should have been, each one occupied. People stood inside with receivers pressed to their ears, mouths moving silently, eyes fixed straight ahead. Calling, calling, calling. Some were fresh, still bleeding, still confused. Some looked ancient. Some had no faces left at all. And in the nearest booth, standing behind cracked glass, was me. Not the dead version in the cab. Me as I am now. Same wet coat, same shaking hands, same terrified eyes. He was holding a receiver. His lips moved. A second later, the payphone in my hand repeated his words. "Martin," my voice said again, "run." So I ran. Not up the stairs. There were no stairs anymore. Only platform, only tile, only tunnel. I ran past my cab, past the body in the driver's seat, past old maps where every line led to the same black circle marked terminal. Behind me, the train doors stayed open. I heard Caleb call my name. Not angry, not forgiving either. Just sad, like he still couldn't understand why I left. I found a maintenance door at the end of the platform and threw myself through it. There was a corridor behind it, narrow and low, lined with pipes sweating black water. The lights went out behind me one by one. Something moved in the tunnel. Not footsteps, wheels, a slow rolling sound, like a train small enough to fit inside the walls. I crawled when the ceiling dropped. I tore my palms open on broken concrete. At some point I started praying, though I couldn't remember the right words. At some point my father's voice came from a pipe beside my head and said, "He's not the only one you left." I kept crawling. Eventually there was a grate. I kicked it until one of the bolts gave way. Then I fell out onto a sidewalk in morning light. People screamed because I came out of a storm drain covered in blood and black water. Someone called an ambulance. Someone else recorded me on their phone. The city was back. Traffic, sirens, construction, men unloading bread from a truck. Normal life. That obscene miracle of normal life. The police came. I told them everything about Delancey. Not the phones, not the train, just Caleb. I told them I hit him. I told them I left. They took my statement. They found the memorial. They found traffic camera footage, blurry but enough. They did not find my cab. That is the part they don't believe. They impounded nothing. No vehicle registered to me has been located. My apartment was empty, except for my wallet, my medications, and a pair of shoes by the bed. They asked how I got around for the past 3 weeks without my cab. I didn't know what to tell them. Then the phone on his desk rang. He apologized and picked it up. I watched his face, at first professional, then irritated, then confused, then pale. He looked at me while someone spoke on the other end. I could hear a train passing through the receiver. He hung up without saying goodbye. When he left the room, I looked at the notepad he'd been writing on. In the margin, small enough that he probably hadn't noticed he'd done it, he had written, "The trains never stop." I don't know what happens next. Maybe prison, maybe a hospital, maybe nothing. Maybe the city keeps living above all of this, with people walking over grates and platforms and sealed stairwells, never knowing how thin the pavement is. But I need you to understand something. The phones are not calling from hell. That would be easier. Hell is not somewhere else. It is under us, beside us, wired into old copper lines and forgotten tunnels and every place where the city decided not to look too closely. And I think it grows when we leave people behind. I hear ringing now, not from the hallway, not from the detective's desk, from inside the wall behind me. One ring, then another, patient, certain. There is no phone in this room, but there is a crack near the floor, and cold air is coming through it. It smells like rain on pavement, like hot brakes, like wet concrete. I can hear someone breathing on the other side. I know it is Caleb. I know it is my father. I know it is me. And beneath all of them, very far down, an announcement is starting. Martin Bell. The lights just flickered. Stand clear of the closing doors. If this one got under your skin, there are more waiting. Subscribe to the leather-bound grimoire.